Hello, I'm going to be reading to you today from the book Get Well Soon. The subtitle is History's Worst Plagues and the Heroes Who Fought Them, and the author is Jennifer Wright. We are going to begin by reading a selection from the chapter on the Bubonic Plague. When the bubonic plague began spreading through Europe in 1347, the average medieval person latched onto treatments that were absolutely, utterly insane. During the 14th century, when the bubonic plague was at its most destructive, 90% of Western Europeans were living off the land, mostly as farmers. If you were a peasant and someone said, "If you live in a sewer, the bubonic plague won't kill you," your reaction likely wouldn't be, I'm curious to hear the science behind that. Your response would be, "Point me to the nearest sewer." Terror over the devastating disease and a lack of scientific knowledge, as well as some people's truly evil tendency to prey upon people's fears, resulted in safeguards that seem ludicrous today. In no particular order, these were some of the 14th century methods thought to be effective against the bubonic plague. Living inside a sewer. The reasoning behind this lifestyle choice seemed to be that your body would become so accustomed to filth and untold horrors that the plague could not harm it. This was wrong, especially as the plague is thought to have been carried by fleas on rats, many of which made their homes in sewers. So you'd be more likely to contract the plague, and you'd be living in a really awful place during your final days. Eating crushed emeralds. Yes, this behavior seems cool. It sounds like something a rich man in Greek mythology would do, but it is not a good idea at all. Emeralds have no value outside of humans' perception of their worth. They are just rocks. People were voluntarily swallowing shards of rocky glass, which had the potential to kill them by ripping their gastrointestinal tract and causing internal bleeding. Unless, of course, the emeralds were ground very, very finely, in which case there would be no effect whatsoever. Eating eggs, fruits, and vegetables. Do we see a glimmer of the modern world? Eating these foods seems like common sense because they are packed with nutrients. But no, that had nothing to do with the reasoning. Instead, the advice had to do with avoiding foods like milk, cheese, and meat, or anything that would smell bad if it was left out in the sun. That's because it was believed that bad smells caused the plague. This notion regarding bad air would persist irritatingly into the 19th century. People kind of lucked into this eating healthy regimen. Not looking at sick people. One doctor believed that an aerial spirit could fly out of a sick person's eyes and into another person's body, especially if you looked at that sick person while they were dying. This is not true, but I suppose you could avoid looking at anyone ever, just in case. Chopping up raw onions and placing them throughout your house. Since many people thought that the plague was spread through bad smells, they hoped that placing onions around the house would purify the air. It didn't. But the myth about chopped up onions having healing properties became shockingly prevalent. Even today, the National Onion Association has to explain in its frequently asked questions that placing chopped onions around your house will not prevent diseases. It is so strange and I guess quite selfless of the organization to do that. We should buy lots of onions to reward it for being honest. Sometimes bubonic plague sufferers were given onion broth to drink. That was both because 14th century people vastly overestimated onions' healing properties, and because, as I learned from the National Onion Association, it is delicious and contains layers of flavor. Drinking your own urine and pus. In an attempt to expose their bodies to the disease and make them hardier, some people would drink pus from burst boils or their own urine twice a day. Needless to say, this tactic did not work, and it makes drinking onion broth sound truly delightful in comparison. For those of you who, having heard these cures, are curious about the real science behind this plague, it is generally spread by flea bites. Certain rats carry and can live with a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. Fleas also live on rats, and when they suck rats' blood, they absorb the bacterium, which then multiplies in the fleas' stomachs. Then the rats carry the fleas to areas populated by humans. When a rat dies, the flea jumps to a new host, like a human. They bite the human host and leave traces of the bacteria in the wound. The bacteria then make their way through the lymphatic system. This results in buboes, which appear on the body like boils, hence the name bubonic plague, although at the time the disease was more often referred to as the Great Mortality. And yes, the word boo-boo is thought to possibly be derived from buboes. You should never kiss a bubo to make it better. The disease would come to be known as the Black Death.